This video is brought to you by Dashlane. GPD, Gamepad Digital, you might know them. They started making Android handheld consoles, eventually started experimenting with great Windows handhelds and released a very cool pocket laptop, all of which I have talked about under specific videos. Since they eventually released a second Windows handheld with a significant spec upgrade, it was a matter of time till they treated the GPD Pocket laptop to a lot of the same improvements. And that is how, sometime in 2018, the GPD Pocket 2 was born to proper mainstream attention. I finally convinced GPD to provide a sample so I could take it farther in terms of gaming than any other video I've seen out there, and I mean, how could I not be excited? The Pocket 1 had a quad-core Intel Atom CPU, which is meant for very light computer use, although I have pushed it to some extremes in the past. This Pocket 2 has a full laptop dual-core hyper-threaded M3, a low-power i3, the same found on the GPD Win 2, and if you have seen my videos on that thing, you can push it really far. Not to mention that compared with the original, it has an extra USB port and a much better keyboard. This mouse knob was replaced by an optical sensor in the corner with two buttons for more precise clicks, but thanks to the extra space, the keyboard is now much easier to use, with finally aligned WASD keys that make it pretty comfortable to game with a USB mouse, which you can now use without taking every available USB port. I was looking forward to having some of the power of the GPD Win 2, but in some games that do better in a keyboard and mouse. At least, that was the original plan until I realized something unexpected. So all the versions I have seen in online stores have at least 8 GB of RAM, but on the original crowdfunding campaign they offer both 4 GB and 8 GB versions, with the 4 gingerbread version being the one they sent to YouTube reviewers. Eventually, they retired the 4 gingerbread model. It is not even on the Indiegogo page anymore, and their newer achievements even have an improved CPU and GPU. So what I got here is a bit of an artifact of the first models of this product. If you go and buy one new, you're likely to get something significantly better. At least it is dual channel and somewhat fast, but the RAM limitation actually sort of kills my most ambitious plans for this device. However, it does represent an interesting challenge. Every day I receive many comments of people specifically asking about what they could do about lack of RAM. Thankfully, RAM is one of those things that many laptops can upgrade, but if you're stuck with a device like the GPD Pocket with no upgrade options, what can you do? Part 1. The operating system. So the first thing to consider is Windows itself. As Windows 10 changes with time and gains more and more functionality, the basic amount of RAM it uses keeps rising. With absolutely nothing else running in the background, the Task Manager was already showing more than 40% of the memory already used. Older versions of Windows tend to use less RAM, but many parts of the GPD Pocket are straight up not compatible with it, and unlike Linux, you can't really customize it for super light usage. Or can you? Deep in the bowels of the web, there's a light version of Windows 10. These are unofficial hacks that have removed every single optional functionality of the system. It cannot do search, it includes almost no software, and there are random elements that will simply not work. But in exchange, its installation takes less hard drive space and significantly less RAM. This is not to be confused with the yet unreleased official Windows 10 Lite that would only allow programs from the Microsoft Store. The unofficial one is simply regular Windows 10 without all the bloatware and optional services. Now, a disclaimer, I won't be providing links to this Windows 10 Lite version for very obvious reasons. You can sort of use it as an official Windows, as you can activate the Windows 10 Lite install using a genuine Windows 10 key, like the one usually included with a GPD Pocket 2. And I'm going to try this for experimental purposes, even though I cannot endorse using this in the long run, especially if you're putting any personal information or passwords into this thing. If you use an encrypted password storage like Dashlane, the one I use and this video's sponsor, you don't have to worry much about your encrypted password storage being uploaded somewhere, and I do recommend using a secure password manager like Dashlane in any case. However, you do have to worry about keyloggers getting your master password, so be conscious when your OS is taken from some weird corner of the internet and always check your sources. Surprisingly, the installation from the USB drive took less than 15 minutes, and after installing the drivers from the GPD website and the latest Intel AC driver, the laptop was fully usable. It was the quickest Windows install I have ever done, and the result is beautiful with only close to 22% RAM usage. This might be a very interesting discovery for low-end PCs. Add to that the removal of all startup programs and all non-Windows services from the start except the anti-cheat system for games and Steam, and we might actually have a solid chance at this thing. Part 2. Games. The majority of the adjustments you can usually do in a game's configuration file can lower the GPU load, and sometimes the CPU load, but very rarely it ever lowers RAM usage. Furthermore, this is running on an integrated GPU, which means it also is using the RAM as VRAM, which puts further pressure on the limited memory. When the computer runs out of RAM, it starts allocating hard drive space in what it's called memory paging. But since even an SSD is much lower than RAM, this will cause incessant stuttering on any game that will make it unplayable at best, and at worst, simply just crash the game at launch. You can use lower resolutions, lower texture sizes, and so on to reduce VRAM usage, and therefore RAM usage on integrated GPUs. This is not universal, and your results might vary, but it can occasionally help, and you can reach some interesting results as I am about to show. Let's start with Fortnite. 720p with a 50% internal resolution and lowest settings. Exclusive full screen as described in my latest video on the topic, using the internal FPS counter as to not use any memory on external software, and closing the Epic launcher as soon as the game launches to save on that memory as well. On the original release, the game had 4 gigs of RAM as its minimum requirement, but as the game has evolved, it tends to need just a bit more. Using all the tricks, the game still suffers from some stuttering, especially when the whole map is visible, but tends to do a bit better once you land. I know that the CPU and GPU can handle the game, but the stuttering caused by low memory can happen the most inappropriate of times. It is a good start, but we can do better. And better we will. Here is Overwatch, another game with 4 gigs on the system requirement that has ballooned a bit over that. This was a total stutterfest on the regular Windows, but now it is doing pretty nice, with barely any stuttering during normal play. This is lowest setting, 720p exclusive full screen with 50% internal resolution, and the trick that I commented on my video, so Battle.net auto closes when the game starts for a bit of extra memory. The integrated GPU and its thermal limits provides something between 30 and 60 FPS, which can drop a bit on the most intense moments, but surprisingly never stops being playable. With a 30 FPS cap, I reckon this will do good. I had a full match with no problems, and it was a great way to actually test if the small keyboard was useful for gaming. Boy is it better than the one on the first pocket. Let's jump to some shooters on Steam. While you can close Steam in the background to save on RAM without closing the game, we can at least use its FPS counter, and as you can see, CSGO 960x540 does slightly better with Overwatch, with not competitive but definitely playable results. A bit less than I expected, but nonetheless good. In the territory of single-player shooters, we can try BioShock Infinite. This Unreal Engine 3 game can be heavily tweaked on its configuration files to remove effects and lower textures. The result is that at 960x540 the game is very playable, keeping itself over 30 FPS at the worst moments, and often a bit more. To close, a little preview of a future project. A lot of fans have been sending me lesser known tweaks that you can do on the original Tomb Raider to screw around with texture quality and the texture filtering. Well, I will eventually make this on its own separate video. Using those changes and a resolution of 960x540, the game benchmark shows an impressive 57 FPS, and in actual gameplay it keeps itself closer to a cool 40. Again, another game that could do great with a 30 FPS lock, even without going to these extremes, and might make for a good portable gaming experience. So in conclusion, while the overall GPD Pocket 2 is an amazing improvement over the first one, if you are buying one, make sure it's the more common 8GB model. If you're limited to 4, there's still a fair amount of gaming you can do with some effort. I'm in the process of borrowing an 8 gingerbread model for a second part video at some point. In the meantime, I'm going to likely format this thing and install Ubuntu, where I can have more control over RAM usage, as it might make for a pretty good portable daily driver for channel management and light editing. at least after I install Dashlane on it, this video sponsor. And that is not just me saying it, it's part of the sponsor read. Dashlane is like the fourth thing that I install on any PC I intend to have for personal use. Dashlane helps generate secure passwords for websites and services and encrypts them locally with a master password. So you only need to remember one thing instead of a bunch, and it is free to start using. If you decide to get a premium account, as I do, for real, I don't get one as part of the sponsorship, I pay for this thing and it has saved me from a couple of hacking scares, you get a bunch of extra functionality like being able to use multiple devices where the locally encrypted storage syncs, so you have your passwords everywhere ready to unlock with your master password, a secure VPN, a dark web monitoring system, which turns out to be useful when you're a YouTuber and people are trying to get into your stuff, and you can attach files to your encrypted sync storage, which turns out to be useful when you're a normal person and you need to store your titles of property and stuff. Dashlane Premium is about $5 a month, but if you use the discount code LowSpecGamer, you get 10% off the annual bill, or if you go to the link in the description, you can try Premium for free for 30 days. Thank you to them for sponsoring this video and you for watching, and thank you to Victor for recording the amazing B-roll footage that I use on this video. Here is this week's hidden joke. Two bites meet. The first bite asks, "Are you ill?" The second bite replies, "Nah, just feeling a bit off."